Imagine being punished for a petty crime by having your nose split in half or your hand chopped off in front of a cheering crowd. Welcome to the bizarre world of medieval justice. Medieval Europe was notorious for its brutal forms of punishment. Crime wasn't just deterred, it was punished in such public and gruesome ways that it often served as both entertainment and a chilling reminder of the law. Understanding these punishments helps us see how far humanity has come in refining justice and human rights. During the Middle Ages, the legal system was harsh, and punishments reflected the belief in physical retribution. Unlike today's prisons, the focus wasn't on rehabilitation, but on public humiliation, pain, and even death. Trials were often rushed, and punishments were designed to send a clear message: break the law, and you'll pay the ultimate price. In the Middle Ages, torture wasn't limited to punishment after a guilty verdict. It often occurred during the trial process to determine whether someone was guilty. For example, an accused person could be forced to plunge their arm into boiling water, and how well they healed would decide their fate. Some courts used torture to extract confessions, even knowing they were unreliable. To make these confessions legal, they had to be repeated within 24 hours without torture. If the person refused, they would simply be tortured again until they confessed. There were three main forms of punishment: public humiliation, corporal punishment, and the death penalty. Public humiliation included the stocks or the pillory, where criminals would be shackled in town squares as bystanders threw rotten food and insults at them. More severe was corporal punishment, where criminals could have their limbs chopped off or faces permanently mutilated through branding or slashing. But the most terrifying was the death penalty. Beheadings, hangings, and burnings at the stake were reserved for severe crimes. Breaking on the wheel, where a criminal's limbs were smashed with a hammer, was one of the most brutal forms of execution. Some punishments, such as being burned alive, carried deeper religious significance. Burning meant no hope of resurrection. But the sheer creativity and cruelty of medieval torture methods went beyond just public beheadings or hangings. One of the most infamous torture devices of the medieval era was the rack. This terrifying machine consisted of a wooden frame with rollers at both ends. The victim's ankles and wrists were bound with ropes attached to these rollers. As the torturer turned a crank, the rollers pulled the victim's limbs in opposite directions, stretching their body agonizingly. In extreme cases, this process dislocated joints, tore muscles, and could even separate limbs entirely. The rack wasn't just a physical nightmare, it was a psychological weapon too. Victims often broke under the threat of enduring this excruciating torment, confessing to crimes just to make it stop. Many saw it as the most effective way to extract confessions or information, especially during the Inquisition or political trials. In a sick twist, the rack could be adjusted to different levels of tension. Some torturers would gradually increase the pain to extend the suffering, while others used it quickly to maximize immediate damage. Its reputation as the king of medieval torture tools was well earned. It could leave victims permanently crippled or dead. The Scavengers Daughter was a brutal and unique torture device used during the Tudor period in England. Invented by Sir Leonard Skeffington, it was essentially the opposite of the rack. While the rack stretched a person's body, the Scavenger's Daughter compressed it. The victim was forced into a crouched position, with their knees pressed to their chest and their head bent down, while iron rings or a metal frame squeezed their body together. This excruciating compression caused blood to pool in the head, chest, and other vital areas, leading to nosebleeds, ruptured eardrums, and intense pain. The idea was that the body's own internal pressure would gradually crush the victim. What made the Scavenger's Daughter particularly horrifying was its deceptive simplicity. It didn't require much physical effort on the part of the torturer, yet it inflicted immense suffering. Victims who endured it for prolonged periods often suffered from permanent internal damage. The device was favored during the reign of King Henry VIII, who used it as a tool to break prisoners both physically and psychologically. It was often employed alongside other torture methods in places like the Tower of London, adding to the terror associated with imprisonment during that era. Despite its sinister reputation, the Scavenger's Daughter didn't enjoy widespread use and eventually faded out as less barbaric methods of punishment emerged. The Judas Cradle is one of the most horrific and creative medieval torture devices designed to cause both unimaginable pain and deep psychological distress. It featured a pyramid-shaped seat where the victim would be lowered, often naked, with the tip of the pyramid positioned to penetrate the most sensitive areas of the body. The weight of the victim's own body was used to inflict greater agony over time, as they were slowly impaled. Torturers could manipulate how fast or slow the process was, making it a drawn-out ordeal. In some cases, weights were added to speed up the process or increase the agony, while others were left to suffer for prolonged periods. This device wasn't just about physical suffering. It was used to humiliate and break the victim mentally. Often employed to extract confessions or punish severe crimes, the Judas Cradle was both a spectacle and a lesson to others. Defy authority and face unbearable torment. Torture sessions could last for hours or even days, with no escape from the constant pain. One of the most horrifying aspects of the Judas Cradle was its simplicity. It required little to no effort on the part of the torturer, yet it was one of the most painful and degrading experiences a person could endure. And while death wasn't always the intended outcome, infections or internal injuries were often fatal. The Iron Maiden, a coffin with spikes on the inside, was a gruesome form of death. The Iron Maiden is a medieval torture device that supposedly earned its name due to its resemblance to a maiden or a female figure. The device itself was a tall, coffin-like structure made of iron. It featured spikes on the interior walls that would impale the victim when the device was closed. Victims would be locked inside as the spikes pierced their bodies, ensuring a slow, agonizing demise. Despite its fearsome reputation, evidence of the Iron Maiden's use during the medieval period is surprisingly scarce. The device became widely known only in the 18th and 19th centuries, long after the medieval era had ended. Historical records from the Middle Ages do not provide concrete evidence that the Iron Maiden was used extensively as a torture device. In some cases, criminals were subjected to tongue-tearing as punishment for blasphemy or treason, or had their limbs crushed on the breaking wheel. Worse still, the Pair of Anguish might sound like a fruit you'd avoid at any supermarket, but it's far from ordinary. This medieval torture device is designed to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering. Imagine a pear-shaped contraption, but instead of being sweet and juicy, it's made of iron and has sharp metal teeth inside. The Pair of Anguish was inserted into a person's body, usually through the mouth, rectum, or vagina. Once in place, the device's mechanisms would expand, causing excruciating pain as the metal teeth would dig into the victim's flesh. The Pair of Anguish was supposedly used for a variety of reasons, from punishing thieves to extracting confessions. Its primary use was to inflict pain that was both severe and prolonged, hoping to break the will of the victim. The idea was that the fear and suffering would compel them to confess or provide information, making it a tool of coercion and intimidation. In medieval times, torturers had little hesitation in inflicting cruel punishments on women, often targeting specific aspects of femininity. In England, men were typically hanged, but women faced brutal methods like drowning pits. Female victims also endured public humiliation, sexual violence, and even bizarre mutilations, particularly focused on the breasts. The most horrific was the breast ripper, a metal claw that shredded the breast, used as punishment or interrogation for crimes such as adultery, heresy, or even being an unwed mother. This brutality reflected deep-rooted gendered violence in medieval society. In medieval times, various devices were used for punishing and torturing people, particularly women accused of gossiping. One such device was the Dunking Stool, which involved repeatedly submerging women in water. Another example is the Scold's Bridle, a contraption primarily used on women accused of gossiping or nagging. It was a metal mask fitted over the head with a sharp bit that pressed down on the tongue, making it impossible to speak. The wearer was paraded through the streets, silenced and humiliated. Another terrifying method was the oubliette, a small dark dungeon in which prisoners were left to slowly starve to death, forgotten by society. The name comes from the French word oublier, meaning to forget. Victims of this punishment were often thrown into a pit with no means of escape. A lesser-known but equally horrific punishment was mud suffocation, used on people accused of theft. Victims were buried in mud up to their necks and left to suffocate slowly, their faces still visible to spectators. The spectacle of such a punishment reinforced the idea of justice being as cruel as the crime itself. Some punishments even involved animals. The rat torture involved a cage filled with hungry rats placed on the victim's stomach. As the rats tried to escape, they would dig through the flesh, causing unimaginable pain. This method was used to extract confessions or as a sadistic form of execution. The flaying of a person alive, where the skin was slowly peeled off the body, was another gruesome execution method. Used as a punishment for treason or heresy, it was a long, agonizing death. These barbaric methods were designed not just to punish the accused but to terrify the public into submission. Another odd punishment was forcing criminals to wear animal masks or badges that publicly marked their crimes, like large red tongues for perjury. In some cases, criminals had to wear white sheets and loudly apologize, turning public shame into part of their punishment. Similarly, more severe punishments like hanging in a cage, a slow, agonizing death where criminals were left to starve or die of exposure in public, combined suffering with public spectacle. Medieval punishments were more than just methods of execution. They were spectacles meant to entertain and enforce societal norms. Each punishment was as creative as it was brutal, reflecting a society that believed fear and pain were the most effective tools of justice. For those sentenced to these horrific punishments, there was often no way to escape. Being publicly shamed in front of a crowd, or having your body permanently scarred, wasn't just physically painful, it marked you as a criminal for life. Society viewed these criminals as outcasts, and in some cases the severity of the punishment far outweighed the crime, creating moral dilemmas around justice. As Europe evolved, the brutality of medieval punishments began to decline, especially as Enlightenment ideals took hold in the 17th and 18th centuries. Philosophers like Cesare Beccaria condemned torture and public executions, pushing for reforms that focused more on proportionality and rehabilitation. Gradually, torture devices disappeared, and public executions became rare. Medieval punishments may seem extreme today, but they played a role in shaping modern legal systems. While we now value human rights, these old methods of punishment remind us of how societies once used fear and violence to enforce law and order. And that's a wrap on the dark world of medieval torture devices. Pretty chilling, right? If you found this video interesting or terrifying, don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe for more fascinating dives into history. We've got plenty more wild facts and strange stories coming your way. And hey, let us know in the comments what historical topic you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.